better business, and a better life begin here. Welcome to Business is Art on TrueChat with author and business consultant, John Umstead.
Hey, thank you for tuning into Business is Art today. We're going to be talking about informed hiring decisions. Now, this is a topic that is not only valuable to the hiring entity or individual, but also to those that are looking to be hired, because, you know, if you think of things from each other's perspective and come at it from that angle, then you stand a much better chance of both finding the ideal candidate as well as finding the ideal job. So don't tune out just because you aren't a hiring manager or a hiring business and you may be on the hunt for a job. It's good stuff for you as well. There's a little bit of irony to today in the guest that we have and the topic that we're covering. I'll hit that in just a moment. But first, I would like to invite you all to connect with me. If you would, please reach out to me on Twitter at John Umstead. That's JONUMSTEAD. You can find me on LinkedIn really easily, or you can go out to my website, plancanvas.net. That's PLANCANVAS.net, where you can find out a little bit about the consulting services I provide, as well as the business planning and strategy execution management software, Plan Canvas, and what that's all about. But reach out to me, start a dialogue. Love to hear from you. But again, today we're going to be talking about informed hiring decisions. And I mentioned that there's a little bit of irony here. The irony is that our guest actually hired me at one point. I'm not sure if if it was an informed decision or not, but it worked out pretty well for me. Hopefully it did for him. It was kind of a short-term engagement. We'll probably talk about that here in a little bit, but it was quite a while ago. And so like I said, I'm sure that will come up. But our guest today is Phil Devendorf. He is the founder and owner of PDServices. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Hey, thanks, John. And obviously, I did make a good decision back then.
Well, was it informed though? I don't know. It was the best you could do at the time, right? So since we teased a little bit, so this was a long time ago. This is back in the early 90s. I was a user of a particular technology, a software, and I got pretty proficient at it. Really liked it, and the vendor that sold this particular software was it was a software company that was actually owned by football great Fran Tarkenton. It was Fran's company, and so I guess technically I worked for Fran, but directly I worked for Phil. So I got proficient at this software. They had an opening for an office that was rather local to me. I applied for the job and got it, and ultimately then went to work for Phil for about 6 months until they decided, hey, we don't need this office anymore. We're going to close it down. How many of us were there? Half dozen of us or so, weren't there, that were affiliated with that?
Yeah, there were, I think, 5 salespeople and 2 consultants, 3 consultants like you, I think.
So my job was to go along, mostly to go along with the salespeople and help them with demonstrations of the software, and then do a little bit of loose consulting with some of the clients. And actually, Phil, I've mentioned on this show multiple times that part of my past was working for Nationwide Insurance, but I've never talked about how I actually ended up at Nationwide. And it was actually through working for Phil. I was on site at Nationwide one day, and they had this software in use, and they were running several projects with it. They needed a consultant to come in and help them out, and asked if I would find a consultant for them. So that was one day. And the very next day, we were all called into the office for a meeting that Phil was running. The subject of the meeting was, the office is closed effective immediately. Thanks for playing. And so as Phil knows, the first thing I did was not call home or call family or friends or anybody. I called Nationwide and said, hey, how about me as your consultant? And that was the first time around in my professional life that I was a consultant. I did that for about a year and then went on board as an employee. Let's talk about you a little bit here. So tell us about yourself and your background, if you would, please.
I started out before the time that we talked about. I started my career with IBM Corporation. and was in sales and then a variety of management positions. And I think that's relevant to our topic because at that time, IBM was really very good at, very well known for what we now call talent management. We didn't call it that back then, but they were very good at hiring. They did some testing in the hiring process, very good at developing people, developing managers, did 360 surveys, did employee surveys, really did all the things that organizations are now kind of striving to do in talent management. And then I left IBM to run an IT consulting organization, smaller organization, and subsequently the organization we talked about and another one, and found that in the smaller mid-sized organizations, they didn't have all the talent management tools that I was used to. And I found as I implemented those in these organizations that it made a big impact. So the IBM experience really led me in an indirect way to what I'm doing today.
And so that does bring us to what you're doing today, which is PDServices. What is PDServices? Well,
we started in 1994, so not too long after you and I parted there, John.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of focus on, I call it data-driven talent management tools. And we focus a lot on small and mid-sized organizations because that's where the big gap is. So by data management tools, I'm talking about candidate assessment testing, 360 surveys, and other talent management software.
And who would be your ideal client or your sweet spot in terms of business sizes or industries?
We find that most of our clients are between 100 employees and 2,500 employees, which is a wide range, but it kind of fits in that small to medium-sized business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really because it's our focus from a marketing standpoint. We've got some people who are larger than that. We certainly have people who are smaller than that.
Mm-hmm.
From an industry standpoint, our tools are cross-industry. We have had a lot of success in financial industry, banks, credit unions, insurance companies. We do a lot in senior care. They have a real need. We do a lot in technology since that's been my background. I kind of speak the language. But we're doing a lot now with the trades, with HVAC and plumbing and some of those types of things.
Good. And it's funny because, you mentioned SMB or small to mid-size or medium-sized business, and 100 employee mark to 2,500 or so. 100 employees is by no stretch a small organization. But by government standards, it is a small business. Anything under 500 employees is considered a small business. So it's a definition that fits the feds, but isn't all that realistic because when you're talking about 100, 200, 300, 400 employees, that's a pretty sizable organization. And there's a lot of considerations that go into hiring practices for organizations that size, as well as smaller businesses. But anyway, it's just a little side note.
Yeah, we do find, John, that some of our smaller companies, we've got customers with 10 employees, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find there is if they miss on a hire,
that's a big miss.
The impact there is so significant. Whereas you can bury it a little bit if you've got 500 employees.
Yeah.
If you've got 10, it can be devastating.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, if you've got 500 employees and you hit a point where maybe budgets are tight, you just want to be a little bit more efficient, maybe it's just a practice, but you make a call to eliminate some percentage of the lowest performing employees, be it anywhere from 1 to 10%. You can get through that and do it okay. Emotions aside, just technically, functionally, from a business perspective, that's doable. But when you start looking at companies that are 5, 10 employees and you start talking about eliminating 10% of the employee base because they just aren't working out, well, that is a big hit. And even worse, sometimes that 10% that isn't working out real well actually is costing you costing the other 9 time and effort, much more so. So you're absolutely right. The impact on the smaller businesses is much greater because you can't hide it. It's just there. There's only so many hands to handle the work. One of the things that we hear a lot, in our lives is that, hey, follow your instincts. We're encouraged to follow our instincts. Do what your gut says. Why might that not be such a good idea or such great advice when you're making hiring decisions?
Well, it's funny you ask because we cover that a lot of times in our seminars and our webinars, kind of that gut feel decision. And research shows that organizations do that a lot in the hiring process. And a lot of it is because they don't have great information to start with. They're working with resumes, which a recent survey showed 63% of them are inaccurate with exaggerated responsibilities or falsified academic credentials or what have you. And then you've got the interview process that most interviewers make their decisions in the first 4 minutes or so of an interview. And it's really because they kind of go with their gut, if you will. They go with, how do I connect with this person? Do I like this person? Do they look professional? Some of those kind of things. And it may not have any relevance whatsoever to whether they can do the job effectively. Mm-hmm. So that's a big piece of the issue that we're trying to address and helping make people make better hiring decisions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with those instincts, right? But you've got to look a little bit deeper. We had a guest on a few weeks ago. She is the chief marketing officer for White Castle. Her name is Kim Bartley, and we were talking about something entirely different. But we got onto a little bit of a discussion about our internal biases and that we all have internal bias and there's nothing wrong with that. But she specifically laid out an example wherein the individual that really became her right hand, when the person walked into the room, she had an immediate internal bias based on the height of the individual. So Kim is not tall. And the person that was interviewing for the position is, and immediately she had a bias, but she recognized it. And on the show, she said, if I had not paid attention to that bias and dealt with it, I would have not hired what possibly is the best hire I have ever made in my entire life. And I think that goes right straight to your point about those biases. And in those first 4 minutes, we draw conclusions that might not be great. They could be based on our internal biases that we're not dealing with.
Right. And I'll give Kim credit on that because most people don't rise above that. Mm-hmm. The research shows that those gut feel decisions give you a successful hire about 25% of the time, about a quarter of the time. Success being meets my expectations. Yeah. So it's really not a very effective way to hire. You could do that well just drawing a name out of a hat, I think.
Yeah. Hey, this isn't really relative directly to the conversation that you and I are planning to have, but I'd like to throw it out just to get your thoughts on it if I can, because you talked about resumes and that sort of thing. But one of the, Phil, I don't know if you're aware, but I'm teaching a couple of courses at a local university. And one of the things I consistently coach the students to do, it's outside of the material, but I like start creating networks for yourself. Get on LinkedIn or whatever other methods and create LinkedIn or create networks for yourself. Get to know people because your odds are very, very low if you are relying on job boards. If you're just applying to positions and going through the electronic submission of your quals and your resumes, good luck. You're probably not going to make it. There are better ways. So how about from a hiring perspective? Is there anything relative to the work that you do that helps your clients to understand that, hey, these electronic means of getting these candidates might not be the best?
Well, if we branch over to sourcing, is what recruiters call it. What are the sources that candidates are coming from? You're absolutely right. If someone is referred in, if you know someone, maybe if you're connected with them on LinkedIn and have some inside information on them, those tend to be better sources than just the blind draw of the job boards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, networking as much as you can, trying to find a way to be referred in. If you've got an organization or a career path that you're targeting, if you can develop relationships with people at least around that who could refer you into jobs or at least be credible references for you, it certainly gives you a leg up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's expand on that a little bit and bring it back on topic. So if a great resume or a great LinkedIn profile isn't really enough and gut instincts don't really lead you to or can lead you to the wrong hiring decisions, what's a better approach? What's a better method for employers?
Okay. That's kind of the sweet spot of what we deal with. So if you buy, and most people will, that good business decisions are made with data. What we really want to do is we want to move the hiring process away from that gut feel that we talked about before, mm-hmm. and more into a data-driven kind of a scientific decision process. Not that the gut feel has to go away, but we want to give you more data to make better decisions. Mm-hmm. So research shows that the best predictors of performance, the best correlation between characteristics and performance include a person's reasoning ability, certain behavioral traits, kind of their core traits, and maybe their interests, their occupational interests, what motivates them. Those are things that you can't get from resumes and from interviews, really, but you can add that data to your hiring process through assessment testing. Mm-hmm. And along with that, what we coach our folks to do, our clients to do, is to start by building kind of a benchmark of the characteristics which really work for that job. So I don't know if you remember, John, but I'm a football fan, and I use a football analogy.
Michigan, right?
That yes. Yeah. In Ohio, I don't advertise that so much.
Yeah, that's okay. You can admit to it. It's all right.
But think about if you have an opening for a wide receiver, and if you stop and think about it, for a wide receiver, you want somebody who's fast, somebody who's agile, somebody who's got good hand-eye coordination so they can catch well. And you start the interview process or the recruiting process, and the first thing you stumble upon is a guy who's a great football player, so you're immediately attracted to him, but you find out he's an offensive lineman. Mm-hmm. And so by definition, he fits that offensive lineman scale. He's big and he's strong and he's tough, maybe even mean. Mm-hmm. But in reality, he doesn't fit the job that you're hiring for. Right? Mm-hmm. So if you hire that guy because he's a good football player, because you like him, maybe he's an All-American, he's never going to be a really good fit for what you have at hand, the job that you're hiring for. Mm-hmm. He could learn to run the pass patterns. He could do some of those things, but he just never is going to be effective, whereas he could be very effective in a different role. So you want to understand what you're hiring for and then recruit for those characteristics.
Well, I was going to say I'd like to jump ahead to a question. Actually, I'd planned to ask you a little bit later, but this is a really good lead into it because I had a client that really religiously followed the recommendations for job candidates that came out of the assessment tool and process that he had implemented at his place of employment. And like he would make no exceptions. If someone came out of the assessment, maybe they're a great person, maybe they had great skills, but if it came out and said this person is not a good fit for this particular position, he simply would not hire them. They had to fit the assessment, or the assessment had to fit. And it didn't matter how much his directors and managers tried to persuade him he just would not budge. Is that a good practice? Is that, is it good, bad, or indifferent that was his practice?
The assessments are great, and I run into this problem a lot of times with my longtime clients, because the longer they use the assessments, the more dependent they become on them. And so I need to kind of coach them back, even coach them away from my tool a little bit, because there's more to the hiring process than just the assessment. You really need to look at what skills does a person have, what maybe academic credentials, maybe they need certain licenses and certifications. There are a number of things that the assessments don't touch on.
Uh-huh.
So when I talk about building a benchmark, certainly we do that with the assessment data. That's kind of where it starts. But I encourage my clients to think more broadly than just my assessments, and think about some of those things. What else do I really need? Do I need certain skill sets? Does this person need to be certified? If they're not certified, do I have the capability to get them there? If not, then certification is a requirement. Are there other requirements just outside of the assessment? In the insurance business, when you're hiring salespeople, a lot of times you expect that person to come in with a book of business. If that's the expectations, that's not going to be part of our assessment tool.
Right. It's interesting. Your response was interesting to me because honestly, Phil, I didn't think that was going to be your response. I thought you would probably lean more towards, follow, because from this former client of mine, his perspective was, hey, once in a while, will I not hire a person that would have been great in that job? Probably. But the odds are much better the other way, that I'm always going to hire the right person for the job. So that was kind of his perspective on it. But, my point of view is exactly the same of yours, and I have a personal story to share that kind of exemplifies that. So we mentioned Nationwide Insurance earlier, so I'll go ahead and just mention this. When I was at Nationwide, at one point, I reported to an individual that had us, after we were in the roles, do a job assessment, survey, go through the process, and I was in a project management role and, at the time, and the results of that assessment was, hey, this guy's not really cut out for project management. And, if I'd have just been asked that, if somebody would have said, hey, is it your life's desire to be a project manager? My immediate response was no, but I know I need to spend some time in this role, to get my, to earn my stripes, so to speak, because there's a role above and beyond that I want to get to. And this is one path to that role that I ultimately want to get to. But the manager that I reported to took it entirely differently, and said, oh my gosh, John sucks at being a project manager. According to this assessment, we can't have him here as a project manager. And, that has left a bitter taste in my mouth, to this day. Everything worked out fine, but, but it was like, well, wait a minute. I know I'm not a project manager. I'm not surprised at the assessment results. I can still be good at it. It's just not what I want to do and what I'm not naturally inclined to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I've seen a lot of examples of that, where if you understand core fit with the job, you do have the capability to flex away from your core. You do have the capability to adapt. You're not going to be most effective there. But like you said, in your case, you kind of adapted to the project manager role, and that was fine. Had you stayed in that role, it might have worn you down.
Right. Because
you were operating outside your core. You might have lost interest. Your performance might have dropped. A lot of those kind of things might happen. But at least for a short term, you were able to perform that pretty effectively and kind of get that stripe that you felt like you needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to your point, I don't think it might have. I think it definitely would have been if 3-4 years down the road, I was still doing that same thing. Yeah, I would have been completely disengaged from that particular role because it wasn't something that interested me. It's just something I felt like I had to do.
Well, and it might not have really been a great fit for your traits, your capabilities, much like that football analogy.
Yeah.
You were kind of operating outside your core.
Yeah. Yeah. So, hey, speaking of engagement, let's take a little bit of a different twist here, if we may. So, Gallup has been doing research for years on employee engagement, just about 20 years on this particular topic. What's the level of employee engagement, both globally and in the U.S.? And in the U.S., since they've been tracking this, we can say for almost 20 years, they've found that employee engagement hovers right around the 30% mark, meaning that 7 out of 10 employees just really aren't engaged. They aren't engaged either in their role or aren't engaged in the company that they work for. So what correlation do you think there might be between job fit and employee engagement?
Well, John, I haven't seen any specific numbers there. As you can tell, and I'm kind of a data guy, but I will say that logic says that, much like we just talked about, if you fit well with the job as an employee, if you're going to enjoy it, you're probably going to perform better. It's not going to wear you out the way some other jobs might, where you don't fit as well. Logic says you're going to be more engaged in that job. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to engage. You're going to be in it for the long term. All those kind of things. So I think there is a correlation between job fit, as we've talked about, and employee engagement.
Yeah, I would think there would have to be, and kind of on a related but separate topic. If I ever went for my PhD, which is pretty much guaranteed that's never going to happen, but if I did, I think I would do my dissertation on studying the correlation between employee engagement and the success rate of corporate strategic initiatives, because they are about the same. About 30% of initiatives actually reach some form of successful conclusion. 30% of the employees are engaged. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's a direct correlation, but that's for another day. But I would like to go back, Phil, to something you were talking about earlier. You mentioned a few things that you really look for in a job candidate. And one of them was their ability to reason, or reasoning ability. What is that, and how do you measure it?
It's the psychologists would call it cognitive ability. It's really the ability to assimilate information quickly and learn and problem solve and reason, if you will, adapt on the job. And it's a mental process. So some people do it fairly quickly. Other people do it more slowly. It's not a direct reflection on what we would call intelligence. I've worked with college professors who are very intelligent, who are lower in reasoning ability. It just takes them longer to assimilate information. But in their case, they've got the time to do that. Mm-hmm. Now, reasoning ability, if you go back to the research, some things that were published in the Harvard Business Review, reasoning ability or cognitive really has the highest correlation between something that you can measure in the hiring process and actual on-the-job performance. And it's about fit, because if you have a job that's fairly repetitive and doesn't require high reasoning ability, then someone with higher reasoning ability, very high reasoning ability, will learn it quickly, but then they'll get bored. And again, they'll disengage. And their performance will drop, and they're likely to leave. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you have the right fit of reasoning ability with the requirements of the job.
Right. And we can go back to your example, your football example, as well as your fandom of Michigan football. Tom Brady is probably a perfect example of somebody that's got a very, very high reasoning ability assessment score, right?
Yep, I would suspect that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, size it up quickly.
Certainly,
take
those
action.
around him, when you hear teammates talk about him and things like that, that's one of the first things they bring up. Is how he just is a master of everything that's going on around him on the football field. Well,
it's a disappointing thing for a guy like me that is neither a Michigan fan nor a Patriots fan, and I'm kind of tired of the Patriots always being in the Super Bowl. But you can't deny the guy is the GOAT. So He's got to have something going on, right?
Yep.
All right. Hey, Phil, we're going to start wrapping up here in a couple of minutes. But first, I again would like to invite our listeners to join the discussion. Find us out on social media at TrueChat.org, or look me up, John Umstead, on Twitter or on LinkedIn, or out at my website, plancanvas.net. Here at the TrueChat Network, all of our shows really focus on the same thing, and that is to educate people through respectful and informed conversations like the one we're having right now. And again, this one is about informed hiring decisions, and it's not just a good conversation and good things to know if you are the hiring party, but also the candidate that is looking for that job or looking for that promotion. You need to understand what kinds of things those hiring managers are looking for, because as Phil said, it's not just what's on a piece of paper, or shouldn't be just what's on a piece of paper in your resume, in your LinkedIn profile, and in your face-to-face or on the phone job interviews. So there's a lot more to it. So pay attention to that stuff. So that all said, Phil, what kind of final advice would you have for our listeners that are either in the hiring mode or in the career search mode?
Well, I think in the hiring mode, it's kind of a summary of what we've talked about. I think you want to add as much good objective data as you can to the hiring process and match it to a benchmark or a well thought out requirement for what's going to fit the job. That'll give you much better hiring decisions and much better success going forward. On the flip side, if you're a candidate, if you're looking for a job, I think you need to think the same way. I think you need to take stock of what your characteristics are and where you would fit best, and target organizations, industries, careers that fit your capabilities and those kind of things. In your case, John, you recognize that project manager job wasn't the end all for you, and you went on to other things. It's important that people assess themselves and recognize themselves and look for fit. That's going to make them happier and more effective in the long run.
Yeah, great point, because we tend to, especially if we're in desperation mode, we tend to start just throwing the cast the net out as far and wide as we possibly can just to see what we might be able to reel in. But, and sometimes you have to do that if you are in desperation mode, but it's a much more effective approach to really be targeted about it. Think about what excites you and, what interests you, or, like the example in my case, what you have to do in order to get to that thing that excites you the most. So, great advice, Phil. Appreciate it very much. Hey, where can people find you or your business?
We're at PDServices.com is our website. Or you can contact me directly either by email at philD@PDServices.com or call me at 740-326-4494.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all of that. Good conversation. Appreciate it very much. Folks, you can find Business is Art and TrueChat on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that quality podcasts may be found. For Business is Art on TrueChat, I'm your host, John Umstead. Again, my guest has been Phil Devendorf. He is the founder and owner of PDServices. We've been talking about informed hiring decisions. Phil, thanks so much for being on the show, and it's been great catching up with you.
Thanks for inviting me, John. I appreciate it.
All righty. We'll see you next time, folks, on Business is Art. Be the change.